Now, like a lot of people, when I first heard that famous evil cackling laugh at the end of the Rise of Skywalker trailer, I thought to myself, oh cool, they're bringing back Palpatine. Then a few minutes went by and I thought, oh cool, they're bringing back Palpatine. And don't get me wrong here, since the prequels, Palpatine has easily been one of my favorite characters in all of Star Wars, maybe only second to Luke Skywalker. And no matter what they do with him, a part of me is just going to be happy to see the legendary Ian McDiarmid reprise the role, so in at least some respect, I'm excited for him to be back. But of course, the big question on a lot of fans' minds is, just how is he going to be used? With some assuming this is all just a type of red herring, and he's hardly going to be in the movie at all, and at most it'll be some old recorded hologram or Sith holocron of his that maybe Kylo Ren or Rey find, and he's barely in this at all. Others are expecting or hoping for him to be a big part of the story, that maybe somehow he's still alive and a master plan of his has been unfolding all this time, and that maybe somehow Rey is part of it by either being a clone of his or a creation of his, or a reincarnation of Anakin meant to destroy him. And of course, both of these possibilities comes with its own set of problems. First, if he's barely in the movie and it has little or nothing to do with him overall, why include that laugh at the end of the teaser trailer, other than to trick people to get them to see your movie? And if that's what you're doing, tricking people or the fans who maybe are on the fence right now about going to see it because they haven't been happy with the previous two movies, well, you're only going to lose those fans forever if you don't live up to the promise of Palpatine. Which is why I do think there's a good chance he will be a significant part of this movie, which leads to its own set of problems, not the least of which is that the previous two parts of the sequel trilogy have not alluded to his return one bit. The name Sidious, or Palpatine, has been mentioned once so far, that being by Luke in The Last Jedi, which means this trilogy is likely going to feel even more disjointed than it maybe already does. And no, for the record here, I'm not going to buy that somehow Snoke and Sidious are one and the same. Everything about them, from their mannerisms to the way they speak to the powers that they have, are completely different. Snoke, like it or not, was just there or used to propel the character of Kylo Ren forward. And so then when it came time to write the next and final movie in this trilogy, and with Snoke dead and Kylo Ren being the only villain left that they really had to work with, since Hux had been reduced to a joke in The Last Jedi, and Phasma had never amounted to anything and had also been killed off, well, JJ realized he had to bring in another villain or threat beyond just putting the whole thing on Kylo Ren's shoulders, especially since there's a good chance of a redemption arc, or at least a tease of one, and he needs something or a reason to come back to the light and to fight against. And so J.J. Abrams' options for a villain were to bring back Snoke from the dead, which would be cheesy unless handled extremely well. He could also create a brand new powerful villain, but likely he wouldn't have time to give them a meaningful place in the story, and they'd come off feeling like another empty, hollow shell of a character like Snoke did. Or he could bring back the one from the previous two trilogies and say that he's tying all these trilogies together. And that's of course what he's said, that this movie will be a definitive end to the whole Skywalker saga and tie everything together. Though at the same time, he's also said that Episode 9 has to stand alone and be a self-contained story that anyone can watch, understand, and enjoy, which is his subtle way of telling us fans not to expect the most intricate or lore-heavy story ever. Basically, if we try and decode everything he's been saying, to me it means that Palpatine is indeed back in a fairly significant way, and that he'll be the one and pretty much only thing that ties back to the other trilogies. Because even if you haven't seen the first two trilogies, and you're watching the sequels, or maybe just this movie, you'll still likely know who Darth Vader was, and be able to get behind and enjoy a story about the guy who was his master coming back to wreak havoc one last time, and needing to be stopped. And if you are someone very familiar with Star Wars, those making these movies might go ahead and assume, right or wrong, that you'll appreciate a story about Palpatine, that the overarching villain from the first two trilogies is still the overarching villain here at the end of the saga, that he's had a plan in place all along, and it's only now coming to its ultimate fruition, and he needs to be stopped by Rey and Kylo Ren together. And as I've said before, that's pretty much what I'm expecting out of this movie, something as simple as Rey and Kylo Ren needing to find a way to come together to stop Palpatine, and to bring a lasting and final balance to the Force, and that's about as deep as it'll go. Even though, again, his return hasn't been hinted at even in the slightest in the previous two movies of the trilogy, and that, depending on how it's all handled, this is going to undo the ending of Return of the Jedi and the sacrifice made by Anakin to stop Palpatine, which isn't going to sit well with a lot of fans unless somehow handled incredibly well. Though to be fair, I think there are ways it could be done well, or even great, but we'll have to see if they can pull it off. And one of the things that will make it or break it for me personally is just how is Palpatine going to come back? I'm not going to buy that he survived falling down a shaft and having the Death Star blow up all around him, as we see in Return of the Jedi. And I'm also not going to buy that he somehow became something like a Force ghost, since George Lucas has said only light side users can become that. Even though, yes, in the Clone Wars animated series, we do see a type of ghost of Darth Bane, but as Yoda basically tells the ghost in that episode, he's dead and no longer has any power. In other words, he's nothing like a Force ghost, he's just a remnant. Now, the more lore-heavy route here, and one I might buy, is that somehow Palpatine not only learned a great deal about cheating death from Plagueis, his old master, but that he learned a great deal more about it in the years after he killed him and before he died himself. And the fact that Palpatine trying to come back from the dead, or believing he could, was talked about and was one of the premises in the Aftermath trilogy of books, well, perhaps there is something here to work with. And again, going back to the Clone Wars animated series, where we learn that becoming a Force ghost is considered the great gift. So perhaps a Sith learning how to manipulate the Force to cheat death could almost be considered the unnatural opposite of that. I mean, it still does take away from Anakin's sacrifice at the end of Return of the Jedi, if Palpatine has somehow come back from the dead. But if the Force ghost of Anakin comes back in this final movie of the Skywalker saga, and tells all this to Kylo Ren, and he begs his grandson to finish what he started, and to balance the Force once and for all, well, I could probably live with something like that. All in all here, the success or failure of the Rise of Skywalker, at least in the eyes of probably a lot of fans, will likely come down to just how Palpatine is used. Because yes, a part of me really does like the idea that he's been the overarching villain the whole damn time. It does make sense that everything, and I do mean everything, including his death, proceeded as he had foreseen. The big problem with it is possibly nullifying Anakin's sacrifice, so in my opinion, he'll at least need to somehow be a part of the solution. And so really here, I see this movie and the idea to bring back Palpatine either being a disaster that blows up in their face, or a brilliant idea that can maybe really tie these three trilogies together in a simple yet effective way. I honestly don't see much middle ground in how fans will feel about this movie when it's all said and done. I don't see many people just saying, yeah, it was okay, and leaving it at that. And not to sound overdramatic here, but in the years to come, The Rise of Skywalker will likely be seen in one of two ways. As the movie that killed the franchise forever for a lot of fans who didn't like the movie or movies before it, and saw it as the final nail in the coffin, or it will be seen as the movie that started to heal the fanbase after the rift opened up by The Last Jedi. And as someone who wants to love this movie and would be happy to see a happier fanbase, I sure hope Palpatine has had one hell of a plan in place all along. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me how you think Palpatine will be brought back and used in The Rise of Skywalker. And if done right, could this really start to heal the fanbase, or is it just too late? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.